I'm Nina Calderon, 26 years old. Until 3 months ago, I believed family meant having each other's backs no matter what. Then my sister Isadora's promotion celebration changed everything. I sat in that gleaming conference room, watching her accept congratulations for work I had done, while my termination letter burned in my purse. Isadora's words from that morning still echo in my mind. Nina, you're so much better at the details anyway. I'm more of a big picture person. What she didn't know was that I had been covering her missed deadlines, rewriting her presentations, and taking blame for her mistakes for 8 months. I had sacrificed my own reputation to keep her spotless. But here's what made this betrayal even more devastating. I had been doing it all while wearing our mother's silver bracelet, the one she gave me before she died, telling me to always watch over my big sister. How could protecting someone I loved cost me everything I worked for? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning it all started to unravel began like every other Tuesday in downtown Chicago. I arrived at Sterling & Associates Marketing at 7:30, 2 full hours before Isadora typically rolled in with her designer coffee and breathless. Apologies. The 32nd floor buzzed with that particular energy of a firm riding high on recent wins. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Lake Michigan that reminded everyone why we endured the pressure. I loved this place once, the sleek chrome fixtures, the motivational quotes etched into frosted glass, the way success felt tangible in every corner. When I'd started 2 years ago, fresh from Northwestern with my marketing degree and a head full of dreams, I thought I found my calling. I was good at strategy, great with clients, and had that rare ability to see the big picture while managing every tiny detail at my desk sat in the junior strategist pod, a carefully organized shrine to productivity. Color-coded calendars marked every deadline, client folders arranged alphabetically. A small succulent Rachel had given me thriving under the fluorescent lights, everything in its place, everything under control. It was a stark contrast to Isadora's workspace 3 pods. Over were papers scattered like autumn leaves, and sticky notes formed geological layers on her monitor. Early bird catches the worm, Mason Whitaker observed, appearing beside my desk with his signature blend of authority and corporate speak. As our team lead, Mason possessed an uncanny ability to make simple observations sound like profound business. Insights? His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit pressed to crisp perfection, and his smile carried just enough warmth to seem genuine without actually meaning anything. Just getting ahead of the Morrison account updates, I replied, pulling up the presentation I'd spent the previous evening perfecting. Morrison Industries was our biggest client, a manufacturing company looking to rebrand their image from industrial powerhouse to environmentally conscious innovator. The account was worth $3 million annually, and Mason had assigned it to both Isadora and me as a team project. In theory, it should have been the perfect collaboration. Isadora had the charisma and client relationship skills, while I brought strategic thinking and execution. In practice, it meant I did most of the work while she took most of the credit during client meetings. Excellent. Morrison's visiting this afternoon for the quarterly review. Mason's eyes scanned my screen, taking in the charts and data visualizations with approval. Where's Isadora? This presentation needs her creative touch. I glanced at the clock, 8:15. She'd be in soon. She mentioned staying late last night to review the brand positioning. The lie slipped out easily, worn smooth by months of practice. In reality, Isadora had left at 4 yesterday for what she called a networking happy hour, but what her Instagram stories revealed to be drinks with her college friends. Good. Team synergy is crucial for client retention. Mason nodded, sagely already moving toward his glass-walled office. I'm counting on you both to make Morrison feel like they're our only priority. As his footsteps faded, I opened my phone and fired off a quick text to Isadora. Morrison meeting at 2. Need you here by noon to review presentation. It's important. The response came immediately. Running late this morning. Food poisoning. Can you handle the prep? You're so much better with the technical stuff anyway. I stared at the message, feeling that familiar knot form in my stomach. Food poisoning was Isadora's go-to excuse, though her Instagram story from an hour ago showed her at her favorite brunch spot, laughing over mimosas with someone tagged as my gorgeous bestie. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was literally posting evidence of her lie. My phone buzzed with another message. You're the best, Nina. I owe you big time. We'll make it up to you. Promise? I set the phone down and returned to the presentation, making mental notes of what Isadora would need to know to sell the strategy convincingly. She was gifted at reading rooms, at making clients feel heard and valued. When she was present, she could charm anyone into believing our recommendations were exactly what they'd been hoping to hear. The problem was getting her present. Let me guess. Rachel Shin's voice cut through my concentration as she appeared with 2 cups of coffee from the good place downstairs. Isadora emergency? Rachel had been my closest friend since orientation, the only person who'd seen through my carefully maintained composure to recognize the stress I carried. Unlike most of our colleagues, she didn't buy into Isadora's effortless charm. As a data analyst, Rachel trusted numbers more than narratives, and the numbers told a clear story about who was actually driving results on our team projects. It's fine, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. She's just running behind. Nina. Rachel's voice carried that gentle but firm tone she used when she was about to say something I didn't want to hear. You know, I love you, but this isn't sustainable. You can't keep covering for her forever. I wanted to argue, to defend my sister, to explain that family loyalty meant something in our household. But the words stuck in my throat because Rachel was right. Each cover story required a little more creativity, each excuse demanded a bit more of my own credibility. I was building Isadora's reputation on the foundation of my own reliability, and the structure was starting to crack. She's been through a lot, I said instead, which was true but incomplete. We'd both been through a lot. Losing our mother when I was 16 and Isadora was 20 had shattered our family's foundation. Dad had retreated into work, leaving us to figure out how to be sisters and surrogate parents to each other. But where I'd responded by becoming more responsible, more careful, more determined to hold everything together, Isadora had gone the opposite direction, treating life like a series of adventures to be collected rather than responsibilities to be met. I know, Rachel said softly. But you've been through a lot too, and you don't use it as an excuse to let other people down. Before I could respond, the elevator chimed and Isadora emerged like a vision from a lifestyle magazine. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves over a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She moved through the office with practiced grace, stopping to chat with colleagues, laughing at exactly the right moments, making everyone feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. Watching her work was mesmerizing and infuriating in equal measure. She possessed a natural magnetism that I'd spent years trying to understand and failed to replicate. Where I relied on preparation and competence, she operated on pure charisma and confidence. The tragic part was that she was genuinely talented. When she applied herself, she just rarely chose to apply herself. Nina. She appeared at my desk like a whirlwind, all apologetic smiles and designer perfume. I'm so sorry about this morning. I felt terrible, but I didn't want to risk getting anyone else sick. Rachel shot me a look that clearly said, food poisoning doesn't require a full makeup application, but I ignored it. No problem, I said, pulling up the presentation. I've got everything ready. Do you want to review it before the Morrison meeting? You're an angel. Isadora leaned over my shoulder, scanning the slides with the quick assessment of someone who'd learned to absorb information rapidly without necessarily understanding it deeply. This looks fantastic. You really captured their vision. We captured their vision, I corrected gently. It's a team effort. Of course. She squeezed my shoulder affectionately. I just meant you have such a gift for pulling all the pieces together. I don't know what I'd do without you. The words should have felt like appreciation, but they carried an undertone that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't gratitude exactly. More like acknowledgement of a service I was expected to provide. Like thanking someone for holding a door you assumed they'd hold anyway. Let's run through the key points, I suggested, minimizing my emotional reaction to focus on practical needs. Morrison's particularly interested in the sustainability messaging, and they'll want to see concrete metrics on brand perception shifts. For the next hour, I walked Isadora through every detail, watching her mental preparation process unfold. She was a quick study when she focused, absorbing information and translating it into the kind of confident presentation style that made clients trust her instinctively. By the time Mason gathered us for the meeting, she seemed fully prepared, completely in command of material she'd learned that morning. The Morrison meeting went smoothly, as they always did when Isadora was properly briefed. She presented our strategy with conviction and flair, fielding questions with the kind of confidence that made clients believe they were in excellent hands. I provided supporting data and clarification when needed, but mostly I watched her work. Her magic, transforming my careful analysis into compelling narrative. Excellent work, team, Mason said afterward as we walked the Morrison executives to the elevator. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking that sets us apart. Isadora beamed, accepting handshakes and compliments with gracious ease. I felt proud watching her succeed, but also strangely empty, like I'd given away something important and couldn't quite remember what it was. Back at my desk, I found a small gift bag tied with ribbon. Inside was a beautiful silver necklace with a delicate pendant shaped like a star. Just a little thank you, Isadora said, appearing beside me, for always having my back. I fastened the necklace, feeling the cool metal against my skin. It was beautiful, expensive, and completely unnecessary. I didn't cover for her for gifts or recognition. I did it because she was my sister, because family meant something, because someone had to keep the pieces together. But as I touched the pendant, I wondered when protecting someone I loved had started to feel like losing myself. The Morrison Industries crisis exploded on a Thursday morning in late September when Chicago's autumn air carried the first hints of winter's approach. I arrived, early as usual, coffee in hand, ready to tackle the final presentation for Morrison's Q4 campaign launch. The presentation that would secure our contract renewal and likely lead to the promotion. Mason had been hinting about for months. My phone had been buzzing since 6 a.m. with increasingly frantic messages from Isadora. Nina, emergency. Can't make in today. Sebastian from Morrison called my cell wanting to discuss concerns about yesterday's preliminary review. I think he just wants to touch base privately, but I'm at urgent care with a friend. Can you handle it? Then, actually, maybe you shouldn't take the meeting alone. Tell Mason I'm handling it from home and will call Sebastian directly. Followed by, on second thought, just postpone everything until tomorrow. I'll be in first thing and we can tackle it together. Each message contradicted the last, painting a picture of someone frantically trying to manage a situation they didn't understand. I tried calling her 3 times, but each attempt went straight to voicemail. A quick check of her social media showed no posts since yesterday, which was unusual for someone who documented everything from her morning latte art to her evening skincare routine by 9 a.m. I was genuinely worried. Isadora was many things, disorganized, occasionally irresponsible, chronically late, but she wasn't cool. She wouldn't abandon a major client meeting without a real emergency. Something was wrong. That's when Sebastian Morrison appeared in our reception area. looking nothing like the jovial executive who'd praised our strategic vision just weeks before. His usually warm demeanor had been replaced by something cold and businesslike, his expensive suit somehow making him seem more intimidating rather than more approachable. "Miss Calderon," he said when Mason brought him to our conference room, "I was hoping to speak with both you and your sister about some discrepancies we've discovered." The word discrepancies hit my stomach like ice water. In client services, discrepancies meant problems. Problems meant investigations. Investigations meant someone was about to be blamed for something. "Isadora's dealing with a family emergency," I said, which felt more honest than another creative excuse. "But I can address any concerns you have about our work." Sebastian opened his leather portfolio and removed a thick folder. "Ms. Calderon, 3 weeks ago, your sister presented what she called preliminary consumer research for our sustainability messaging campaign. She assured us this data came from focus groups conducted specifically for Morrison Industries." He slid a document across the table. "Yesterday, my team discovered that this exact research was published in a Marketing Quarterly Case Study 6. Months ago, the data wasn't preliminary and it wasn't ours. It was generic research that anyone could have downloaded from the internet." The room seemed to tilt sideways. I stared at the document, recognizing the charts and statistics that had formed the backbone of our presentation. The same presentation I'd helped Isadora prepare. The same data I trusted her to source properly. "There must be some explanation," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to myself. "Maybe there was confusion about the sourcing, or perhaps there's more." Sebastian's tone remained professionally neutral, but I could hear the disappointment. "Underneath, the brand positioning survey your sister referenced, also publicly available data from a completely different industry, the customer demographic analysis, copied from a 3-year-old study about millennial buying habits that has nothing to do with our target market." Each revelation felt like a physical blow. I had reviewed every slide, asked detailed questions about methodology, trusted that the foundation of our strategy was solid. How had I missed something so fundamental? "Ms. Calderon," Sebastian continued, "Morrison Industries has built its reputation on integrity and transparency. We expect the same from our partners. When we pay for original research and strategic analysis, we expect to receive exactly that." Mason, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "Sebastian, I assure you this is completely unacceptable and not representative of Sterling and Associates standards. We'll investigate immediately and provide a full explanation." "I'm afraid we're past the point of explanations." Sebastian closed his portfolio with finality. "Morrison Industries is terminating our contract, effective immediately. We'll expect a full refund of fees paid for what was essentially plagiarized work." The silence that followed felt suffocating. $3 million in annual revenue gone. A client relationship built over 2 years destroyed. My reputation and potentially my career hanging by a thread because I trusted my sister to do her job with the same integrity I brought to mine after Sebastian left. Mason closed the conference room door and turned to face me with an expression I'd never seen before. Gone was his usual corporate cheerfulness, replaced by something much harder and more calculating. "Nina, I need to understand exactly what happened here. This isn't just about losing a client. This is about potential legal liability and damage to our firm's reputation." I felt trapped between loyalty to my sister and honesty about what I knew. I trusted Isadora's research. She said she conducted the focus groups and analysis herself. I had no reason to doubt, but you reviewed the presentation, correct? You were involved in the preparation? Yes, but I focused on strategic recommendations based on the research she provided. I didn't verify the original sources. The admission felt like confessing to a crime I didn't know I committed. Mason nodded slowly, and I could see him mentally constructing the narrative that would protect The firm. Here's what we know. Isadora led this account. She presented the research, and she assured the client of its authenticity. However, you were involved in the preparation and presentation of fraudulent material to a major client. Fraudulent? The word hit me like a physical slap. I didn't know the research was fake. Intent doesn't matter to Morrison Industries. What matters is that their trust was violated and our firm's credibility is now in question. Mason's voice carried the cool deficiency of someone making difficult but necessary decisions. I have to consider what's best for Sterling and Associates. The subtext was clear. Someone had to take responsibility, and it wasn't going to be the firm. Where is Isadora? Mason asked. We need her input on the situation immediately. I tried calling her again, but the phone went straight to voicemail. A sick feeling was growing in my stomach, the recognition that something was very wrong with this entire situation. Isadora might be disorganized, but she wasn't unethical. She wouldn't deliberately use fake research, would she? I can't reach her, I admitted, but I'm sure there's an explanation. Maybe she made an honest mistake, or perhaps she misunderstood. The sourcing requirements. Mason's expression suggested he found my faith in my sister naive at best. Nina, I appreciate your loyalty, but we're dealing with a potential disaster here. Morrison could sue us for fraudulent misrepresentation. Other clients might question the integrity of their work. I need facts, not optimism. The next few hours passed in a blur of damage control meetings, legal consultations, and increasingly desperate attempts to reach Isadora. By afternoon, it became clear that she wasn't simply dealing with an emergency, she was actively avoiding the office. Finally, around 3 p.m., she called me back. Nina, thank God, she said, her voice carrying a breathless quality that didn't sound like relief. I've been in meetings all day with a potential new client. Big opportunity. What's this about Morrison having concerns? The casual tone, the complete disconnect from the magnitude of our crisis, made my chest tight with anxiety. Isadora and Morrison terminated our contract. They discovered that the research she provided was plagiarized from public sources. Silence. Isadora? Are you there? That's impossible, she said finally. I conducted that research myself. They must be mistaken. They had proof. The exact studies you used, published months ago. Sebastian showed me the documents. Another pause, longer this time. Nina, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe someone on their team made an error. Corporate politics can be complicated, and sometimes clients look for excuses to renegotiate contracts. Her response felt scripted, like she was reading from prepared talking points rather than genuinely processing what I was telling her. The sister I knew would be panicking, demanding details, immediately rushing to the office to fix whatever had gone wrong. This version of Isadora sounded like she was managing a public relations crisis rather than learning about one. You need to come in immediately, I said. Mason wants to talk to both of us, and we need to figure out how to respond to Morrison's accusations. I can't right now. This new client meeting is crucial. But don't worry, I'll sort everything out tomorrow. Morrison's probably just trying to leverage a better deal. The call ended before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. My sister, who I protected and covered for countless times, was abandoning me to handle a crisis that could destroy both our careers. That evening, Mason called me into his office as the rest of the staff was leaving. The setting sun cast long shadows across his desk, and the usually energizing view of Lake Michigan looked cold and unwelcoming. Nina, I've spent the afternoon in conversations with our legal team and senior partners, he began. The Morrison situation is more serious than we initially thought. They're not just terminating the contract, they're demanding a full investigation into our research practices. My mouth felt dry. What does that mean? It means we need to demonstrate that Sterling and Associates takes research integrity seriously. and that this incident was an isolated failure, not a systemic problem. Mason's corporate speak was becoming denser, which usually meant he was delivering bad news. We need to show Morrison and our other clients that we've taken decisive action. The inevitable conclusion was forming in my mind, but I couldn't quite accept it yet. What kind of action? Nina, you were the primary contact for day-to-day account management. You reviewed and approved the presentation materials. In the eyes of Morrison Industries, you bear significant responsibility for this breach of trust. But I didn't know the research was fake. I trusted Isadora's work, just like you trusted both of us to handle the account professionally. I understand that, and I believe you acted in good faith. But good faith doesn't change the outcome. Mason's voice carried what might have been genuine regret, though it was hard to tell through his professional veneer. The partners have decided that we need to terminate your employment, effective immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and making the room seem to spin slightly. You're firing me. We're making a difficult but necessary business decision. Nina, you're talented and hardworking, and this situation doesn't reflect your true capabilities. But we have to prioritize the firm's reputation and client relationships. What about Isadora? The question came out sharper than I intended. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Isadora will be subject to a formal review process, naturally. But given that she's currently developing new business opportunities and wasn't directly involved in the day-to-day account management, the partners feel her situation requires different handling. Translation: Isadora had somehow positioned herself as being above the crisis while I was drowning in it. I sat in that office, watching my career implode, understanding with crystal clarity that I was being sacrificed to protect both the firm and my sister. The loyalty that had driven me to cover for her, to smooth over her mistakes, to build her reputation at the expense of my own visibility, had ultimately made me the perfect scapegoat. I'll need your access cards and company equipment before you leave tonight, Mason said gently. HR will be in touch about final paperwork and severance details. Walking back to my desk to collect my personal belongings felt surreal. The office that had been my second home for 2 years suddenly felt foreign and hostile. Colleagues I'd worked closely with wouldn't meet my eyes, though I wasn't sure if they knew about my termination or were simply absorbed in their own end-of-day tasks. Rachel found me packing my few personal items into a cardboard box. "What's happening?" she asked, taking in the scene with growing alarm. "I've been fired," I said simply. The Morrison account imploded because Isadora used plagiarized research, and I'm taking the fall. Rachel's expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and something that looked like vindication. "Nina, I'm so sorry." But I'm also not surprised. I've been watching this dynamic for months, and I knew something like this would happen eventually. "You knew?" "I knew you were carrying her weight and getting none of the credit. I knew she was taking advantage of your work ethic and your loyalty. I didn't know it would end this badly, but I knew it would end badly." As I drove home through Chicago's evening traffic, my mother's silver bracelet felt heavy against my wrist. The symbol of family loyalty that had guided so many of my decisions now seemed like a shackle, a reminder of promises that had cost me everything I'd worked to build up. My phone buzzed with a text from Isadora. "Heard about today. So sorry you're going through this. Let's talk tomorrow when things calm down." Family first. Always family first. The words that had shaped my choices for years now felt like a cruel joke. I put family first, and family let me fall. The first week after losing my job passed in a strange haze of disbelief and desperate action. I'd never been unemployed before, not since high school, when summer jobs at the mall felt like exciting adventures rather than necessary survival. Now, at 26, with rent due in 3 weeks and a reputation apparently in tatters, Unemployment felt like drowning in slow motion. I spent those initial days crafting the perfect resume, trying to distill 2 years of genuine accomplishments from the wreckage of the Morrison disaster. Every bullet point required careful consideration, which projects could. I claimed full credit for versus those where Isadora's involvement might surface during reference checks, which achievements truly belonged to me versus those where I'd been. The invisible engine behind her visible success. The hardest part was explaining my departure from Sterling and Associates. Left to pursue new opportunities sounded hollow and suspicious. Seeking greater challenges felt like obvious corporate speak. Restructuring led to position elimination was technically true but easily disproven. I finally settled on transitioned to explore new career directions, which had the benefit of being both honest and completely meaningless. Rachel had been my lifeline during those first few days, bringing coffee and moral support while I worked from her kitchen table to avoid the suffocating quiet of my empty apartment. Her analytical mind helped me organize my job search strategy, creating spreadsheets to track applications and deadlines, color-coding potential employers by industry and probability of response. "You're being too conservative," she said on Friday afternoon, reviewing my target company list. "You're only applying to mid-size agencies where you think they won't check references too carefully. Why aren't you going after the positions you actually want?" "Because I don't want to waste their time or mine," I replied, highlighting another opening for junior strategist positions that paid 20% less than what I'd been making. "I need to be realistic about my situation." "Your situation is that you got scapegoated for someone else's ethical failures. That's not the same thing as being incompetent." But it felt the same. Every rejection email, and they were coming daily now, reinforced the growing conviction that my professional reputation was permanently damaged. Hiring managers who had seemed interested during initial phone screenings would suddenly become unavailable after requesting references. The few in-person interviews I managed to secure ended with polite but distant handshakes and promises to be in touch soon. That never materialized. The worst part was how isolated the job search made me feel. Most of my social circle revolved around work colleagues I no longer saw daily. Friends from college had scattered to different cities or gotten absorbed in their own career advancement. Dating felt impossible when I couldn't even explain what I did for work without getting into the Morrison disaster. My world had shrunk to my apartment, coffee shops with good Wi-Fi, and Rachel's sympathetic but increasingly worried expressions. Isadora, meanwhile, had become a ghost. After that initial text expressing sympathy, she'd gone silent for 3 days. When she finally called, it was to share exciting news about her new client opportunity that was apparently going incredibly well. "I can't get into details because of confidentiality agreements," she said, her voice bright with the particular energy she got when things were going her way. "But Nina, this could be huge for me, for both of us, actually. Once everything settles, I might be able to bring you in as a consultant or something." "What about the Morrison situation?" I asked. "Have you heard anything from Mason or the partners about the investigation?" "Oh, that." Her tone shifted slightly, becoming more careful. "I think they've moved past it, honestly. Sometimes these client relationships just run their course, you know? Morrison was probably looking for an excuse to make changes anyway." The casualness of her response felt like a slap. Morrison hadn't just run its course. It had exploded because of fraudulent research that she had provided and I had been blamed for. But in Isadora's version of events, it was just one of those things. That happened in business, barely worth discussing now that she had moved on to bigger and better opportunities. "Isadora, I lost my job because of what happened. I need to know what really occurred with that research so I can figure out how to explain it to potential employers." "Nina, don't make this about blame. These situations are complicated and honestly, I think you're being too hard on yourself." Maybe this is an opportunity for you to try something completely new. An opportunity, as if professional disgrace was a gift I should be grateful for. I've been thinking, she continued, maybe this. Is the universe telling you that corporate life isn't your path? You're so creative and talented. Maybe you should consider freelancing or starting your own business. It was a kind suggestion wrapped in willful ignorance. Starting a business required capital, connections, and credibility, none of which I possessed. As an unemployed marketing strategist with a questionable employment history, freelancing meant convincing clients to trust me with their businesses when I couldn't even convince hiring managers to trust me with their job openings. But more than the practical obstacles, what bothered me was how Isadora seemed to view my crisis as a minor inconvenience that could be solved with optimistic thinking and career pivoting. She wasn't offering concrete help, just inspirational platitudes that made her feel better about the role she played in my downfall. After 2 weeks of rejections, I was forced to consider positions well below my experience level. Administrative, assistant roles at marketing firms, coordinator positions at nonprofits, temporary agencies that specialized in placing overqualified professionals in underqualified roles. Each application felt like another step away from the career I'd worked to build, but pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Carmen Rosario, the founder of Verdant Social, a sustainable fashion brand, had gotten my name from Rachel, who had analyzed consumer data for them the previous year. Carmen was looking for someone to help develop a comprehensive marketing strategy for their expansion into Midwestern markets. I'll be honest, Carmen said during our phone conversation, I can't afford a big agency right now. I need someone talented who's willing to work on a project basis while I figure out if this expansion makes financial sense. It wasn't full-time employment, but it was legitimate work with a client who seemed more interested in my capabilities than my employment. History. When I explained my departure from Sterling and Associates in vague terms about wanting more entrepreneurial opportunities, Carmen nodded approvingly. Corporate agencies can be soul-crushing, she said. I did my time at a big consulting firm before. Starting Verdant. Sometimes you have to blow up your life to build something better. Her perspective was refreshing, but also highlighted how different our situations were. Carmen had chosen to leave her corporate job to pursue a passion project, backed by her savings and family connections. I'd been pushed out of my corporate job and was now scrambling to rebuild any kind of professional stability. Still, the Verdant project felt like a lifeline. Carmen's brand had substance and values I could genuinely support. Her target audience was well-defined, and her expansion goals were realistic rather than grandiose. For the first time in weeks, I found myself excited about work instead of just desperate for income. I threw myself into the project with the intensity of someone proving their worth to both the client and themselves. I conducted thorough market research, all original, all properly sourced, all documented with meticulous attention to attribution. I analyzed competitor strategies, identified target demographics, and developed messaging frameworks that aligned with Verdant's commitment to sustainable and ethical manufacturing. Working with Carmen also provided something I hadn't realized I'd been missing: honest collaboration. She asked direct questions, provided clear feedback, and treated me as a strategic partner rather than a service provider. When she disagreed with my recommendations, she explained her reasoning and worked with me to find alternatives that met both her vision and market realities. You're remarkably thorough, she observed during one of our strategy sessions at her Lincoln Park studio. The space reflected her brand perfectly: reclaimed wood furniture, plants cascading from hanging planters, samples of organic cotton fabrics organized by color in glass jars. Have you always been this meticulous, or is this a response to recent events? Her directness caught me off guard. Most people tiptoed around the subject of why I was freelancing instead of working for an agency. Both, probably, I admitted. I've always been detail-oriented, but recent experiences have made me even more careful about documentation and verification. Good, Carmen said firmly. I've worked with too many consultants who promise the world and deliver generic strategies they've recycled from previous clients. What you're providing is thoughtful, original work that actually fits my business. Her validation meant more than she probably realized. After weeks of rejection and self-doubt, having someone recognize and value my capabilities felt like returning to myself after a long period of feeling lost. But the freelance income, while meaningful, wasn't sufficient to sustain my lifestyle. Long term, Carmen's project would last 2 months at most, and I still needed to find permanent employment with benefits and career advancement opportunities. The job search continued, though now with slightly more confidence and at least one positive reference for future conversations. 3 weeks into my unemployment, I finally heard from someone at Sterling and Associates. Not Mason or anyone from leadership, but Jennifer from HR, calling to schedule a time to discuss my transition documentation. There are some questions about client files and project handovers that we need to clarify. She explained in the carefully neutral tone that HR professionals used when discussing potentially litigious situations. The meeting took place in a small conference room I'd never seen before, tucked away from the main office areas where former colleagues might witness my return. Jennifer sat across from me with a thick folder and a legal pad covered in notes, looking uncomfortable with whatever conversation she'd been assigned to conduct. Nina, thank you for coming in. I know this is a difficult situation for everyone involved. She opened the folder and removed several documents I recognized as client files and project summaries. We need to ensure proper handover of your responsibilities and clarify your involvement in various account activities. What followed was an hour of detailed questions about every project I'd worked on, every client interaction I facilitated, every document I created or contributed to. The subtext was clear. Sterling and Associates was building a comprehensive record of my activities in case they needed to defend themselves against future legal challenges or client complaints. Regarding the Morrison Industries account, Jennifer said carefully, we need you to document your specific contributions versus those of other team members. This includes research responsibilities, client communications, and presentation development. It was a trap disguised as routine paperwork. Anything I claimed credit for could potentially be used to assign blame for the Morrison disaster. Anything I attributed to Isadora could be challenged if she had told a different story. I found myself parsing every response carefully, trying to be honest without providing ammunition for future lawsuits. Where is Isadora? I asked when Jennifer paused to review her notes. Shouldn't she be part of this documentation process? Ms. Isadora Calderon is currently working on a special project that requires her full attention. Jennifer replied in a tone that suggested the topic was off limits. We're handling team member documentation separately to ensure accuracy and avoid any potential conflicts of interest. Translation: Isadora was being protected while I was being thoroughly documented as the responsible party for anything that might go wrong, walking out of Sterling and Associates for what I knew would be the last time. I felt a strange mixture of relief and grief. Relief that I would never again have to navigate the politics and expectations of that particular environment. Grief for the career I thought I was building and the naive belief that hard work and loyalty would be sufficient. Protection against professional disaster. My phone buzzed with a text from Isadora as I reached the parking garage. Hope your meeting went well. Still working on that big project, but let's catch up soon. Missing you. The casual tone, the complete absence of curiosity about what Sterling and Associates might have asked me, the breezy assumption that everything was fine between us, it all felt so characteristic of how she'd handled this entire crisis. Present for the pleasant moments, absent for the difficult conversations, confident that our relationship could continue unchanged despite everything that had happened. But something had changed in me. During those 3 weeks of unemployment and uncertainty, The sister who would have protected Isadora's comfort by pretending everything was fine was being replaced by someone who needed honest answers and genuine accountability. I was still loyal to my family, but I was beginning to understand that loyalty couldn't be a one-way street. That evening, I started a new document on my laptop. Questions for Isadora. Not accusations or demands, just honest questions about what had really happened with the Morrison research, why she had disappeared during the crisis, and how she planned to help repair the professional damage that had affected both of us. For the first time since losing my job, I felt like I might be starting to find my voice stopped by my 6th week of unemployment. I had developed a routine that felt productive while masking the underlying desperation. Mornings were for job applications and networking emails. Afternoons belonged to Carmen's project, which had expanded beyond the original scope as she recognized the value of having dedicated strategic support. Evenings were spent updating my LinkedIn profile, researching potential employers, and fighting the urge to scroll through Isadora's increasingly triumphant social media posts. The contrast between our situations had become impossible to ignore. While I crafted careful explanations from my employment gap, Isadora shared photos from client dinners at expensive restaurants, celebrated major wins with designer shopping trips, and posted cryptic but excited updates about life-changing opportunities. Her success felt simultaneous to my struggle in a way that made the universe seem particularly cruel. "You need to talk to her," Rachel said over coffee at our usual spot near her office. I mean, really talk to her, not those surface-level check-ins, where she updates you on her amazing life while you pretend everything's fine with yours. I've tried. Every conversation becomes about her new project and how well everything's going. When I bring up the Morrison situation or my job search, she changes the subject or offers vague encouragement about new opportunities. Then don't let her change the subject. Rachel's analyst mind was shifting into problem-solving mode. "Nina, you've spent 2 months protecting her comfort by not demanding answers. Meanwhile, you're drowning financially and professionally. That dynamic has to change." She was right, but confronting Isadora felt like dismantling something fundamental about our relationship. I'd spent so many years being the responsible sister, the one who cleaned up messes and smoothed over problems, that I wasn't sure who I would be if I stopped playing that role. The opportunity for that conversation came sooner than expected. Carmen's project had reached the point where she needed to make decisions about implementation, and she wanted to present my recommendations to her business partner and lead investor. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at their offices, and Carmen had asked me to present the strategy personally rather than just submitting a written report. "I want them to see who did this work," she explained. "Your strategic thinking is exactly what we need, and I'm hoping this leads to a longer-term consulting arrangement." The possibility of ongoing work with Verdant felt like the first genuine light at the end of what had been a very long tunnel. But that afternoon, as I was preparing for the presentation, Isadora finally called with what she described as important news we need to discuss. "I can't talk long," I said, reviewing my notes one final time. "I have a client presentation in 2 hours." "That's actually perfect timing," Isadora said, her voice carrying an excitement that immediately made me wary. "Nina, remember how I mentioned this big project I've been working on? Well, it's about to become official, and there might be an opportunity for you." "What kind of opportunity?" "I can't get into all the details over the phone, but I've been consulting with a boutique agency that's expanding rapidly. They're looking for talented strategists, and I mentioned your availability." The timing felt suspicious. After weeks of radio silence about my job search, Isadora suddenly had a lead exactly when I was building momentum with my own client. "Which agency?" I asked. "Sterling and Associates." The words hit me like cold water. "What?" "I know it sounds complicated, but Nina, this could be perfect. Mason reached out about bringing me on for a special project. Essentially, rebuilding the client services division after some recent challenges. There's a real opportunity to shape how they approach strategy work going forward. I felt the room spinning slightly. Isadora, are you telling me that you're going back to work for the company that fired me? It's not like that. This is a completely different role, reporting directly to the partners rather than through Mason. And honestly, it might give me the influence to advocate for bringing you back once the Morrison situation is fully resolved. The Morrison situation isn't going to be resolved. They fired me as a scapegoat and kept you to protect their relationship with other clients. Going back there would be career suicide for me. Don't be so dramatic. Corporate situations are more fluid than you think. People move on, priorities change, and sometimes what seems like the end is actually a new beginning. Her optimism felt disconnected from reality in a way that made me question whether we were even discussing the same events. Isadora, do you understand that I can't get references from Sterling and Associates because of what happened? That my professional reputation was damaged specifically to protect yours? Nina, I know you're frustrated, but this victim mentality isn't helping anyone. Sometimes careers involve setbacks that require creative solutions rather than dwelling on past problems. Victim mentality. The phrase hung in the air like smoke, revealing something about how my sister viewed my situation that felt fundamentally wrong. I wasn't playing victim. I was dealing with concrete, professional consequences that have resulted from covering for her mistakes. I have to go, I said. My presentation starts soon. Of course. Good luck with your little project. But Nina, think about what I said. This sterling opportunity could be exactly what you need to move forward. After she hung up, I sat in my car outside Carmen's offices, trying to process what I'd just learned. Isadora was returning to the company that had fired me in a role that sounded significantly more senior than what either of us had held before. She was positioning this as an opportunity to help me while simultaneously benefiting from the very situation that had destroyed my standing with that employer. The meeting with Carmen's business partner and investor went well, better than I had hoped. My strategic recommendations were thorough, realistic, and backed by solid research. They asked detailed questions about implementation timelines, budget requirements, and metrics for measuring success. Most importantly, they treated me as a strategic partner whose insights were valuable for their business decisions. This is exactly the kind of thinking we need, Carmen's business partner said as we reviewed the competitive analysis. You've identified opportunities we hadn't considered and provided a roadmap for sustainable growth. At the end of the presentation, Carmen walked me to the parking garage with news that made my entire week. We want to offer you a 6-month consulting contract with the option to extend based on results. It's not full-time employment, but it's substantial enough that you could focus on our growth strategy exclusively. The relief was overwhelming. Not just the financial security, but the validation that my work had value, that the Morrison disaster hadn't permanently destroyed my ability to contribute meaningfully to business strategy. There's one condition, Carmen continued. We want exclusivity during the contract period. No other clients, no job searching, just complete focus on helping us execute this expansion plan. It was exactly what I needed. Meaningful work, fair compensation, and the chance to rebuild my professional confidence without the constant stress of job hunting. But it also meant declining any other opportunities that might arise, including whatever Isadora was proposing with Sterling and Associates. That evening, I called Isadora to share my news and explain why I wouldn't be pursuing this Sterling opportunity. Nina, that's wonderful about your fashion project, she said, though her enthusiasm sounded polite rather than genuine. But are you sure you want to limit yourself to one small client when there are bigger opportunities available? Verdant. iSun's social isn't small. They're growing rapidly and offering me exactly the kind of strategic role I want. Plus, they treat me as a partner rather than just a service provider. I'm just saying, Consulting work can be unpredictable. Wouldn't you prefer the stability of a traditional employment arrangement? Not with Sterling and Associates. Isadora, I need you to understand something. I can't work for a company that fired me to protect their reputation while keeping you to maintain client relationships. It would undermine everything I'm trying to rebuild professionally. But this would be a chance to prove that the Morrison situation was an anomaly. You could show them what you're really capable of. Her persistence felt increasingly strange. Why was she so invested in me returning to a workplace that had treated me as disposable? Can I ask you something honestly? I said. What really happened with the Morrison research? I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I still don't understand how you ended up with plagiarized data. Silence stretched between us before she answered. Nina, I think you're overthinking this. These kinds of research mix-ups happen more often than you think. The important thing is learning from the experience and moving forward. But I need to understand what happened so I can prevent it from happening again. Did you accidentally download the wrong files? Were you working from outdated sources? I just need to know what went wrong. Does it really matter now? The situation is resolved. We've both moved on to better opportunities, and dwelling on past mistakes won't change anything. Her evasiveness was becoming impossible to ignore. For months, I'd accepted her explanation that the Morrison disaster was simply a misunderstanding or research error. But her unwillingness to discuss details, combined with her sudden opportunity to return to Sterling and Associates in a senior role, was painting a different picture. Isadora, were you already talking to Sterling about coming back when I got fired? Another pause. Nina, I think you're creating conspiracy theories where none exist. Sometimes opportunities arise organically through professional networks. It wasn't a denial. It was the kind of non-answer that politicians used when they couldn't afford to lie, but couldn't bear to tell the truth. That night, I made a decision. That felt both liberating and terrifying. I was going to stop protecting Isadora's comfort and start protecting my own interests. I would take the Verdant contract, focus on rebuilding my professional reputation through honest work, and stop trying to understand or fix whatever had happened at Sterling and Associates. But first, I needed to have one completely honest conversation with my sister, even if it meant confronting truths that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. I sent her a text. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? There are things we need to discuss honestly. Her response came quickly. Of course. I have so much to tell you about this Sterling opportunity. This could be amazing for both of us. Reading her message, I realized she still didn't understand. That I was no longer interested in opportunities that required me to pretend the past hadn't happened. I was ready to build something new. Something that didn't depend on family loyalty outweighing personal integrity. The next morning, I sat in our usual coffee shop reviewing notes from my first week of work with Verdant and preparing for what I knew would be the most difficult conversation my sister and I had ever had. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving towards something positive rather than just away from something painful. Carmen had given me a handwritten copy of her business plan the day before, pages covered with her careful script outlining goals, values, and growth strategies. I want you to understand not just what we're trying to accomplish, but why it matters to me, she'd explained. The document felt precious in a way that corporate presentations never did, personal, authentic, and grounded in genuine purpose. Holding that plan, I realized what had been missing from my professional life at Sterling and Associates, the sense that my work contributed to something I could believe in. I've been so focused on advancement and recognition that I'd forgotten to ask whether the work itself aligned with my values. Isadora arrived 15 minutes late, as always, but this time her tardiness felt disrespectful rather than charmingly chaotic. She slid into the booth across from me with a bright smile and an elaborate story about traffic and construction that I suspected was mostly fictional. Nina, I'm so excited to talk about this Sterling situation. I really think it could be perfect. For both of us. Isadora, I interrupted gently. Before we talk about future opportunities, I need to understand what happened in the past. I need you to tell me the truth about the Morrison research. Her smile faltered slightly, and for just a moment, I saw something in her expression that looked like fear. Nina, why are you so focused on looking backward? We should be talking about moving forward. Because I can't move forward until I understand what I'm moving forward from. She shifted in her seat, suddenly very interested in adjusting her bracelet and avoiding eye contact. I told you it was a research mix-up. These things happen in consulting work. Isadora, 3 separate studies that you use were publicly available and completely unrelated to Morrison's industry. That's not a mix-up. That's either gross negligence or deliberate deception. The words hung between us, harsher than I'd intended, but necessary in a way I'd been avoiding for too long. I think you're being unfair, she said quietly. I made a mistake and I'm sorry it had consequences for you. But I don't think accusing me of intentional wrongdoing is helpful. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking you to help me understand what happened so I can learn from it and protect myself in future situations. But even as I said it, I realized that learning from the experience required acknowledging that the experience had been a betrayal rather than a misunderstanding, and acknowledging that betrayal meant confronting the fundamental dynamic of our relationship, one where my protection of her reputation had become more important than her honesty. With me, the conversation that followed would change everything between us, though not in the way either of us expected. The coffee shop conversation with Isadora unraveled everything I thought I understood about my sister, my career, and the events that had destroyed my professional life. What started as a request for honesty became a revelation so devastating that I questioned whether I'd ever really known the person sitting across from me. Nina, I need you to understand something, Isadora began, her voice taking on a careful, practiced quality that made my stomach clench. The Sterling situation is more complicated than you realize. There are opportunities here that could benefit both of us, but only if you're willing to be strategic about how we approach them. Strategic. The word choice felt significant, as if she was speaking in code. What do you mean by strategic? She glanced around the coffee shop, ensuring no one was listening, then leaned forward conspiratorially. Mason contacted me 3 weeks ago. Not just about consulting work, but about a permanent position as Senior Director of Client Strategy. It's a significant promotion, essentially rebuilding the department after the Morrison situation created SOME restructuring needs. My brain struggled to process what she was saying. 3 weeks ago? Isadora, 3 weeks ago, I was still getting rejection letters because of what happened at Sterling. How are you already in discussions about a promotion? That's what I'm trying to explain. The Morrison situation wasn't just about bad research. It was about identifying who could handle crisis management and who couldn't. I proved that I could maintain client relationships and find solutions under pressure. Solutions? The word came out sharper than I intended. Isadora, the Morrison contract was terminated. I was fired. How is that a solution? She fidgeted with her coffee cup, avoiding direct eye contact. Nina, sometimes individuals have to be sacrificed for the greater good of the team. Mason needed to show Morrison that Sterling takes accountability seriously, and unfortunately, you were in the most vulnerable position. The casual way she said it, individuals have to be sacrificed, made my chest feel tight. The most vulnerable position? Isadora, I was vulnerable because I had been covering for your mistakes for months. I was vulnerable because my loyalty to you made me the perfect scapegoat. That's not how Mason sees it. From his perspective, you were the project manager who failed to verify research integrity. I was the senior strategist who maintained client relationships despite a team member's error. The careful phrasing, the practiced narrative, The way she positioned herself as the competent professional managing my incompetence, it all felt rehearsed, as if she'd been preparing this explanation for weeks. Isadora, whose research was it? Who told me that you had conducted original focus groups and demographic analysis? I sourced research that I believed was appropriate for the project. If there were verification issues, those fell under project management responsibilities. It was corporate doublespeak, the kind of language designed to avoid accountability while maintaining plausible deniability. But more than that, it was a fundamental rewriting of our shared history. You're saying I was responsible for verifying research that you told me was original work? I'm saying that project management includes quality control and verification processes. That's basic professional practice. My phone buzzed with a notification. LinkedIn was informing me that someone in my network had shared a post. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen and saw Isadora's name connected to a Sterling, an associate's announcement. Exciting news to share. The post began. I'm thrilled to announce my promotion to Senior Director of Client Strategy at Sterling and Associates. After successfully navigating some challenging client situations, I'm looking forward to rebuilding our strategic services division with a focus on innovation and integrity. Grateful for the opportunity to lead and grow with such an amazing team. #promotion #leadership #strategy. The post had been published 20 minutes ago. While we sat in this coffee shop, while she explained to me how individual sacrifices were necessary for team success, she was publicly celebrating the promotion that had been built on my professional destruction. I turned the phone toward her. Is this what you meant by strategic? Her face flushed, but her expression remained carefully controlled. Nina, I was planning to tell you about the announcement after we discussed how this could create opportunities for you. Opportunities? For me? Isadora, you just publicly celebrated getting promoted while explaining to me why I deserved to be fired. How exactly does that create opportunities for me? Because I'm now in a position to influence hiring decisions. Once some time has passed and the Morrison situation is truly behind us, I could advocate for bringing you back in a role that better suits your skills. The audacity was breathtaking. She was offering to rescue me from a situation she had created, using influence she had gained by sacrificing my reputation to protect her own. What really happened with the Morrison research? I asked again, this time with the clarity that comes from recognizing you're being manipulated. And this time, I need you to tell me the truth. Isadora was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I was overwhelmed. The account was bigger than anything I'd handled before, and Morrison's expectations were so specific. I started researching, but I couldn't find data that supported the strategy direction Mason wanted. So I found studies that were close enough and adapted them to fit our narrative. You plagiarized research and presented it as original work. I used existing research as a foundation and customized it for our clients' needs. That's not uncommon in consulting work. It's fraud, Isadora. You committed fraud and let me take the blame for it. I didn't let you take the blame. I tried to protect both of us by managing the client relationship and finding a solution that would satisfy Morrison while minimizing damage to the firm. What solution? The contract was terminated. The solution was identifying the source of the problem and addressing it decisively. Mason needed to show Morrison that Sterling could handle accountability, and he needed to preserve relationships with other clients who might be concerned about research integrity. The way she described it, my termination wasn't collateral damage. It was the intended outcome. A strategic decision to sacrifice my career to protect the firm's reputation and, by extension, her position within it. Did you know I was going to be fired? Another pause. I knew that someone would probably have to take responsibility for what happened. I hoped it wouldn't be you, but I also knew that my relationship with Morrison gave me more leverage to find a resolution. So you let me be the scapegoat while you position yourself as the problem solver. I tried to minimize the damage for everyone involved, including you. How did you minimize damage for me? I lost my job, my professional reputation, and 2 months of income. But you also got a clean break from a situation that wasn't working. Nina, you were never going to advance at Sterling the way you deserved. You're too thoughtful, too careful, too focused on details instead of big picture strategy. This forced transition might end up being the best thing that could have happened to your career. It was the most honest thing she'd said all morning and also the most insulting. According to Isadora, losing my job was actually a favor because I wasn't suited for advancement anyway. And now you're offering to help me come back to a place where I'm apparently not suited for advancement? I'm offering to help you come back in a role that would actually utilize your strengths. Maybe something in project management or quality assurance where your attention to detail would be valuable. Project management or quality assurance. Lower level positions where my attention to detail could be contained and controlled, where I could support other people's advancement without threatening their leadership opportunities. Isadora, do you understand what you're asking me? You want me to return to work for a company that fired me to protect you, in a subordinate role reporting to the person who benefited from my termination. I'm asking you to consider a practical solution that could rebuild your career while allowing you to work together as a team. Team. The word felt hollow now, drained of meaning by everything she'd revealed. I thought about Carmen's handwritten business plan, about the respect and partnership I'd found working with someone who valued integrity over advancement. I thought about the relief I'd felt signing the Verdant contract, knowing I could focus on meaningful work without constantly managing political dynamics and hidden agendas. I'm not interested, I said simply. Nina, don't make a decision based on emotion. This could be a real opportunity for professional growth. It's not emotional. It's practical. I've found work that allows me to use my skills in an environment where honesty and collaboration are actually valued. Why would I give that up to return to a place where loyalty is a one-way street? Her expression shifted, becoming colder and more calculating. Because consulting work is unpredictable and insecure. Because small clients can disappear overnight and leave you with nothing. Because at some point, you'll need stable employment with benefits and advancement opportunities. There was truth in what she said, but it was also a threat disguised as concern. Work with me or face the uncertainty of freelance life alone. Maybe, I said, but I'd rather build something honest than repair something that was broken from the beginning. I gathered my things and stood to leave. Congratulations on your promotion, Isadora. I hope it's everything you wanted. Nina, wait, don't leave like this. We're family. Family, the word that had guided so many of my decisions. That had convinced me to prioritize her success over my own integrity. That had made me complicit in my own professional destruction. We are family, I agreed. But that doesn't mean I have to enable your success at the expense of my own dignity. Walking out of that coffee shop felt like stepping out of a story I'd been telling myself for years. The story where family loyalty was noble and selfless, where protecting someone you loved was always the right choice, where being reliable and trustworthy would eventually be rewarded with respect and recognition. The real story was messier and more painful. Sometimes the people you protect don't protect you back. Sometimes loyalty is taken advantage of rather than reciprocated. Sometimes the very qualities that make you a good sister make you a vulnerable employee. But it was also a story with the possibility of a different ending. I had work that challenged and fulfilled me. I had clients who treated me with respect. I had the opportunity to build professional relationships based on mutual trust rather than one-sided sacrifice. That afternoon, I called Carmen to confirm my acceptance of the 6-month contract and discuss next steps for the Verdant expansion strategy. Her enthusiasm was genuine. Her questions were thoughtful. and our conversation focused entirely on how to create value for her business and customers. "I have a good feeling about this partnership," she said. "It's going to be exactly what we both need." For the first time in months, I believed that someone was right about what I needed. And what I needed wasn't rescue or redemption. It was a chance to prove my worth in an environment where worth was measured by contribution rather than compliance. The plot twist hadn't been Isadora's promotion or even her willingness to sacrifice my career for her advancement. The plot twist was discovering that I didn't need her protection, her opportunities, or her version of family loyalty to build something meaningful and successful. I was finally ready to write my own story. The 3 months following my coffee shop revelation with Isadora passed in a blur of focused work and gradual healing. The Verdant contract had evolved beyond my wildest expectations, transforming from a simple marketing strategy project into comprehensive business development that touched every aspect of Carmen's expansion plans. What had started as a lifeline was becoming the foundation for an entirely new career trajectory. Carmen's sustainable fashion brand was experiencing the kind of growth that created both tremendous opportunities and overwhelming challenges. My initial market analysis had identified Chicago and Milwaukee as ideal test markets for their Midwest expansion. But as we dug deeper into implementation, it became clear that success would require a much more sophisticated approach than anyone had anticipated. "Nina, I need to be honest with you," Carmen said during one of our weekly strategy sessions in her Lincoln Park studio. "This project has grown beyond what I can manage internally. We're looking at warehousing decisions, distribution, partnerships, retail relationships, and digital marketing strategies that require expertise I simply don't possess." She paused, absently arranging fabric samples while gathering her thoughts. "I've been talking to my investors about bringing on a strategic development director who could oversee all of this expansion work. Would you be interested in discussing what that might look like as a full-time position?" The offer was everything I'd been afraid to hope for: meaningful work, competitive compensation, equity participation, and the opportunity to build something from the ground up with people who shared my values. But it also meant making a commitment. That felt simultaneously exciting and terrifying. "What would that role involve?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Essentially, you'd be responsible for all strategic initiatives related to growth and expansion. Market research, competitive analysis, partnership development, operational planning, everything we've been working on together, but with broader scope and longer-term thinking." Carmen pulled out a leather portfolio and removed several documents. "I've been putting together a business plan for our series of funding round, and honestly, I can't imagine presenting it without you as part of the leadership team." She handed me a beautifully bound document titled Verdant Social Sustainable Fashion for Conscious Consumers. My name appeared on the second page as Strategic Development Director alongside Carmen's role as CEO and her business partner Marcus as co. "This is incredible," I said, flipping through pages of financial projections, market analysis, and growth timelines that incorporated months of my research and recommendations. "But Carmen, I've never held a director-level position before. Are you sure I'm ready for this kind of responsibility?" "Nina, you've been functioning as our strategic development director for 3 months. The only difference would be making it official and giving you the authority and compensation that match your contributions." The business plan was comprehensive and compelling, but it was also ambitious in ways that made my analytical mind surface potential concerns. Verdant was projecting 300% revenue growth over 2 years, expansion into 6 new markets, and the launch of 3 additional product lines. The strategy was sound, but execution would require flawless project management and decision-making under pressure. "Can I ask you something honestly?" I said. "Why me? You could hire someone with more experience, someone with a proven track record of managing this kind of growth." Carmen smiled with the kind of warmth that had made me trust her from our first conversation. because experience without integrity is just expensive consulting. You've shown me that you can develop innovative strategies while maintaining ethical standards. You ask the right questions, you think through consequences, and you're not afraid to tell me when my ideas need refinement. She gestured toward the studio around us, where samples of organic cotton dresses hung alongside sketches for new designs and charts tracking customer feedback. Nina, I'm building something that needs to last. I need partners who understand that sustainable business means more than just sustainable materials. It means sustainable relationships, sustainable practices, and sustainable growth that doesn't sacrifice values for short-term profits. The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering everything from equity percentages to reporting structures to long-term career development opportunities. By the end, I understood that Carmen wasn't just offering me a job, she was inviting me to help build the kind of company I'd always wanted to work for. I need to think about this, I said, though my heart was already saying yes. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Nina, I hope you'll seriously consider it. I think this could be exactly what both of us are looking for. That evening, I spread the business plan across my kitchen table and read every page with a thoroughness that had become my professional trademark. The strategy was ambitious, but realistic. The financial projections were conservative enough to be achievable, and the company values aligned perfectly with my own beliefs about business and social responsibility. But more than the professional opportunity, what struck me was how Carmen had positioned my role in the document. I wasn't described as support staff or a service provider, but as a strategic partner whose insights would shape the company's direction. My market research was cited extensively. My competitive analysis formed the foundation for positioning. Decisions and my recommendations for sustainable growth were presented as core elements of Verdant's value proposition. For the first time in my career, someone was offering me credit for my contributions rather than asking me to enable someone else's advancement. I called Rachel to share the news and process my feelings about the opportunity. Nina, this is incredible, she said after I'd outlined the offer. 6 months ago, you were unemployed and questioning your professional worth. Now you have the chance to join a company's leadership team and help guide their growth strategy. I know it's almost too good to be true, which makes me nervous about accepting. Why? What are your concerns? I've been thinking about that question all evening. Partly, it's imposter syndrome. Can I really handle director-level responsibilities? What if I'm not ready for that kind of leadership role? Nina, you've been demonstrating director-level thinking for months. The only question is whether you're ready to accept credit for your capabilities. The deeper concern, which I was only beginning to articulate, was about trust. After the Sterling and Associates experience, the idea of committing to any organization felt risky. What if Carmen's values were just good marketing? What if the company's culture changed as it grew? What if I was making myself vulnerable to another professional betrayal? I think you're overthinking this, Rachel continued. Carmen has been consistently ethical, transparent, and supportive throughout your consulting relationship. She's offering you equity, authority, and recognition. Compare that to how Sterling treated you. The comparison was stark. At Sterling, I'd been valued for my reliability and willingness to work behind the scenes. At Verdant, I was being valued for my strategic thinking and leadership potential. The difference wasn't just professional. It was philosophical. The next morning, I woke up with unusual clarity about what I wanted to do. I called Carmen and asked if we could meet to discuss the details of accepting the position. I am interested, I said when we sat down in her office. But I want to understand exactly what success looks like in this role and how we'll measure progress toward our goals. What followed was the most thorough and honest career conversation I'd ever had. Carmen outlined specific expectations, performance metrics, and growth opportunities. She acknowledged the challenges we face and the skills I need to develop. Most importantly, she committed to providing the support and resources necessary for me to succeed in the role. "There's one more thing," she said as our meeting was concluding. "Next month, we're presenting to potential investors for our Series A round. I'd like you to present the market analysis and expansion strategy sections. It would be your first official responsibility as Strategic Development Director. The investor presentation would be my debut as a member of Verdant's leadership team. My opportunity to demonstrate that Carmen's faith in my capabilities was justified. It was also, I realized, my chance to prove to myself that I could perform at this level without compromising my integrity or enabling someone else's success at my expense. I'd be honored to present our strategy," I said. That afternoon, I began preparing for what felt like the most important presentation of my career. Unlike the Morrison disaster, this time I was presenting work that was entirely my own, research that I had conducted with meticulous attention to accuracy and attribution, and recommendations that reflected genuine strategic thinking rather than borrowed insights. The presentation would cover 8 months of market research, competitive analysis, and strategic planning. It would demonstrate not just my analytical capabilities, but my understanding of sustainable business practices, consumer behavior, and growth management. Most importantly, it would show potential investors that Verdant had the leadership team necessary to execute their ambitious expansion plans. As I worked late into the evening, refining charts and crafting narrative flow, I thought about how different this felt from my previous professional experiences. Instead of anxiety about potential mistakes or concerns about taking credit for collaborative work, I felt confident and excited about sharing ideas that I believed in. The morning before the investor presentation, I received an unexpected text from Isadora. "Heard through the network that you're doing well with freelance work. Would love to catch up and hear about what you're working on." I stared at the message for several minutes, considering how to respond. Part of me was curious about her motivation for reaching out now after months of silence. Part of me wondered if she'd heard about the Verdant opportunity and was hoping to find a way to benefit from my success. But mostly, I realized that I no longer felt the need to protect her from uncomfortable truths or protect myself from her potential disapproval. I had work that fulfilled me, colleagues who respected me, and opportunities that excited me. Isadora's opinion of my choices was no longer relevant to my happiness or success. I typed back, "Thanks for reaching out. I'm doing very well and focusing on work that aligns with my values. Hope you're happy with your choices too." It was polite, honest, and final. No invitation for further conversation, no opening for her to insert herself into my new professional life, no suggestion that our relationship could return to its previous dynamic. The next morning, I put on my best suit, gathered my presentation materials, and drove to the downtown office building where Verdant's investor meeting would take place. As I walked through the lobby, I carried with me months of hard work, careful research, and strategic thinking that belonged entirely to me. For the first time in my professional life, I was stepping into a room where my success would depend entirely on my own capabilities, integrity, and commitment to excellence. It felt like finally becoming the person I always had the potential to be. The investor presentation took place in a glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown Chicago high-rise with panoramic views of Lake Michigan serving as backdrop to what would become the defining moment of my professional transformation. 3 potential investors sat around a polished conference table. Elena Rodriguez from Sustainable Ventures Capital, David Park representing Impact Growth Partners, and Sarah Chan from Green Future Investments. I had spent weeks preparing for this 90-minute presentation, but as I connected my laptop to the projection system, I felt remarkably calm. This wasn't the anxious energy I'd experienced before client presentations at Sterling and Associates, where I'd worried about Isadora's preparation or Mason's approval. This was focused confidence built on thorough preparation and genuine expertise. "Good morning," Carmen began, introducing our team with the kind of pride that still felt new to me. I'm Carmen Rosario, CEO and founder of Verdant Social. This is Marcus Wong, our Q, and Nia Calderon, our Strategic Development Director, who will be presenting our market expansion strategy. Strategic Development Director. 4 months ago, I'd been unemployed and questioning my professional worth. Now I was being introduced as a key member of a leadership team to investors who would determine the future of a company I believed in. Thank you, Carmen, I said, standing to begin my portion of the presentation. Over the past 6 months, I've conducted comprehensive research into sustainable fashion markets across the Midwest, and I'm excited to share our findings and strategic recommendations with you today. The first section covered market analysis, demographic research, and consumer behavior patterns that I identified through original research and data analysis. Unlike the Morrison presentation that had haunted my career, every chart and statistic in this presentation was sourced, verified, and attributed. I'd learned from past mistakes in ways that made me more thorough rather than more cautious. Our research indicates that consumers in Chicago, Milwaukee, and Minneapolis are significantly more likely to pay premium prices for sustainably produced fashion than the national average. I explained, advancing to a slide that showed purchasing behavior by geographic region. However, current market options are limited, creating a substantial opportunity for a brand like Verdant that combines style, sustainability, and accessibility. Elena Rodriguez leaned forward with interest. Ms. Calderon, can you walk us through your methodology for this consumer research? How did you account for the difference between stated preferences and actual purchasing behavior? It was exactly the kind of detailed question that would have terrified me 6 months ago, but now it felt like an opportunity to demonstrate the rigor of my analysis. Excellent question. We conducted a 3-phase research approach. I began, advancing to a methodology slide. First, online surveys with 1,200 consumers across target markets to establish baseline preferences. Second, focus groups in Chicago and Milwaukee where participants reviewed actual products and price points. Third, and most importantly, we analyzed purchasing data from similar sustainable fashion brands to identify gaps between stated intentions and documented behavior. I walked through the research findings in detail, explaining how we'd identified price sensitivity thresholds, brand preference factors, and purchasing decision triggers. The investors asked increasingly sophisticated questions, and I found myself energized by their engagement rather than intimidated by their scrutiny. The consumer research led us to our competitive positioning strategy. I continued, moving to the next section of my presentation. Rather than competing primarily on price or exclusively on sustainability messaging, we identified an opportunity to position Verdant as the intersection of style, ethics, and accessibility. David Park interrupted with a question that went to the heart of our business strategy. How do you differentiate accessible sustainability from what larger retailers are already offering? What prevents established brands from copying your approach? That's where our operational strategy becomes crucial. I replied, feeling grateful for months of deep thinking about exactly this challenge. Verdant's competitive advantage isn't just about messaging. It's about integrated supply chain management that allows us to offer genuine sustainability at accessible price points while maintaining quality and style. I explained our supplier relationships, manufacturing partnerships, and distribution strategies that Carmen and Marcus had developed over 3 years. But more importantly, I demonstrated how these operational advantages created barriers to entry that would protect our market position as we scaled. Our financial projections, I continued, advancing to the final section of my presentation, are based on conservative assumptions about market penetration and growth rates. We're projecting 300% revenue growth over 2 years, expansion into 6 markets, and achieving profitability by month 18. Sarah Chun raised her hand. Ms. Calderon, those are aggressive projections for a fashion startup. Can you explain the assumptions underlying your confidence in these growth rates? This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the question that would determine whether investors saw me as a naive optimist or a strategic thinker who understood both opportunities and risks. You're absolutely right to question aggressive projections, I said, pulling up a slide that showed multiple scenario analyses. These numbers represent our base case assumptions, but we've also modeled conservative and accelerated growth scenarios based on different market conditions. I walked through the 3 scenarios in detail, explaining the key variables that would drive performance in each case and the strategic adjustments we'd make to respond to different market conditions. The conservative scenario still showed profitable growth, while the accelerated scenario demonstrated what was possible if market conditions exceeded our expectations. Most importantly, I concluded, our expansion strategy is designed to be scalable and sustainable. We're not sacrificing long-term stability for short-term growth, and we're building operational capabilities that will support continued expansion beyond our initial target markets. The question and answer session that followed was intense, but exhilarating. For 45 minutes, 3 experienced investors challenged every aspect of our strategy, questioned our assumptions, and pushed us to defend our projections. Rather than feeling defensive, I felt energized by their engagement and confident in my ability to address their concerns. "This is impressive work," Elena Rodriguez said as the formal presentation concluded. "Ms. Calderon, your market analysis is thorough and your strategic recommendations are well-reasoned. I'm particularly impressed by your scenario planning and risk mitigation strategies." After the investors left to deliberate, Carmen, Marcus, and I retreated to a nearby coffee shop to debrief the presentation and wait for their decision. "Nina, that was incredible," Carmen said, her relief and excitement evident. "You handled their questions better than I could have hoped. I think we have a real chance of securing this funding." "The research spoke for itself," I replied, though I felt proud of how I presented complex information in accessible ways. When you have solid data and clear strategy, the presentation becomes much easier. Marcus nodded approvingly. "I've been through a lot of investor presentations, and that was one of the most professional and convincing strategic analyses I've seen. You made our expansion plans feel both ambitious and achievable." We spent the next hour reviewing the presentation, discussing potential investor concerns and talking through next steps regardless of the funding decision. But I found myself feeling unexpectedly calm about the outcome. We had presented our best case honestly and professionally. Whether or not these particular investors chose to fund our growth, I knew that the strategy was sound and the opportunity was real. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. "Ms. Calderon, this is Elena Rodriguez. I wanted to let you know that our investment committee has reached a unanimous decision. We'd like to move forward with a Series A investment in Verdant Social." The relief and excitement were overwhelming. But what struck me most was the professional satisfaction of knowing that my work had directly contributed to this success. The market research, competitive analysis, and strategic planning that had convinced these investors was entirely my own, original, thorough, and based on genuine expertise rather than borrowed insights. "There's one additional element we'd like to discuss," Elena continued. "Our committee was particularly impressed by your strategic presentation and your role in developing Verdant's expansion plans. We'd like to include additional equity allocation, specifically tied to your position as Strategic Development Director. Additional equity, recognition that my contributions warranted ownership stake beyond standard employee compensation. It was validation of my value that went far beyond salary or title." That evening, I sat in my apartment reading through the preliminary term sheet that Elena had emailed, trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. 6 months ago, I'd been fired from Sterling & Associates and struggling to find any employment. Now I was an equity-holding member of a leadership team that had just secured substantial growth funding. But more than the professional advancement, what felt most significant was the integrity of the process. I had earned this opportunity through honest work, ethical research practices, and genuine strategic thinking. No one had been sacrificed for my success. No corners had been cut to achieve the results. No relationships had been damaged to protect. My reputation. My phone rang with a call from Rachel, who had been anxiously waiting for news about the investor presentation. "Nina, tell me everything," she said immediately. "How did it go?" "We got the funding," I said, still processing the reality of those words. "Elena Rodriguez called an hour ago. They're investing in our Series A round." "Nina, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. After everything you've been through, you deserve this success." We talked for an hour about the investor presentation, the funding terms, and what this meant for Verdant's future growth. But toward the end of our conversation, Rachel asked a question that made me think about how far I'd come personally, as well as professionally. "How do you feel about all of this? Not just the career success, but the way you've rebuilt your professional life after what happened with Isadora and Sterling?" I considered the question carefully before answering. I feel like I finally understand the difference between loyalty and enabling, between collaboration and sacrifice, between family support and professional codependency. "What do you mean?" I spent so long thinking that protecting Isadora was what family loyalty required, but what I was actually doing was enabling her to avoid accountability while making myself vulnerable to consequences. Real loyalty would have meant expecting her to maintain ethical standards and protecting both of our reputations. Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret how things happened? Do you wish you'd handled the Sterling situation differently?" "I regret that I was naive about office politics and family dynamics. But I don't regret that it ended, because it led me to work that aligns with my values and colleagues who treat me as an equal partner." That night, I called my father to share the news about the promotion and funding. We talked for over an hour about my new role, Verdant's mission, and my plans for the future. Near the end of our conversation, he said something that surprised me. "Nina, I'm proud of how you've handled this career transition. I know it's been difficult, but you've shown real strength and integrity throughout the process." "Thanks, Dad." Though I have to admit, there were times when I wondered if I was making the right choices. "That's what makes them the right choices," he said. "When you're making decisions based on your values rather than just your immediate comfort, there's always uncertainty. But you've built something meaningful rather than just rebuilding what was broken." After we hung up, I realized that he was right. I hadn't just found a new job. I discovered what it felt like to work in an environment where honesty, collaboration, and mutual respect were foundational principles rather than aspirational goals. The climax of my story wasn't the investor presentation or the funding announcement, though those were important milestones. The real climax was the moment I stopped trying to rebuild my old professional life and started building something entirely new, something that honored my capabilities, respected my integrity, and recognized my worth. For the first time in my career, I was exactly where I belonged. 6 months after the Series A funding announcement, I found myself sitting in Verdant Social's new headquarters in River North, reviewing quarterly performance reports that exceeded our most optimistic projections. The company had grown from Carmen's small Lincoln Park studio to a 5,000 square foot office space with dedicated areas for design, operations, customer service, and strategic planning. My office, the first private office I'd ever had, overlooked the Chicago River and served as a daily reminder of how dramatically my professional life had transformed. The expansion into Milwaukee and Minneapolis had exceeded all expectations, with both markets achieving profitability ahead of our projected timeline. Our customer acquisition costs were lower than anticipated, repeat purchase rates were higher than industry averages, and brand awareness metrics suggested significant potential for continued growth. More importantly, customer feedback consistently praised not just our products, but our company values and commitment to sustainable practices. Nina, do you have a minute? Carmen appeared in my doorway with the kind of excited energy that usually meant she'd been developing new ideas. I just got off a call with Elena Rodriguez, and she wants to discuss accelerating our timeline for West Coast expansion. Elena had become more than an investor. She was a strategic advisor, whose guidance had been invaluable as we navigated rapid growth. Her suggestion to accelerate West Coast expansion was based on market research indicating that Los Angeles and San Francisco consumers were actively seeking sustainable fashion options that Verdant could provide. That's exciting, I said, pulling up our strategic planning documents. Though we'll need to carefully analyze our operational capacity before committing to additional market expansion. Exactly what I told her, which is why she wants you to lead the feasibility analysis and present findings to the board next month. Over the past year, I'd learned to navigate the balance between ambitious growth and sustainable expansion. The lessons from my Sterling and Associates experience have made me more thoughtful about risk management and more committed to thorough analysis before making strategic recommendations. But they'd also taught me the importance of advocating for my ideas when I believe they were sound. I'll start working on the analysis this week, I said. But Carmen, I want to make sure we're not expanding faster than we can maintain quality and values. That's what differentiates us from competitors. Agreed. Completely. That's why I need your strategic perspective on this decision. You've consistently helped us balance growth opportunities with operational realities. After Carmen left, I opened my laptop and began outlining the feasibility analysis for West Coast expansion. The work was challenging and complex, requiring research into new supply chains, distribution partnerships, marketing strategies, and operational requirements. But it was also energizing in ways that reminded me why I'd been drawn to strategic planning in the first place. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Coffee after work? I have news to share. Rachel had been promoted to senior data analyst at her firm and was considering an offer to join a startup focused on sustainable technology. Our friendship had deepened during my career transition, built on mutual support and honest communication that had sustained us through challenging professional and personal changes. That evening, we met at our usual coffee shop, the same place, where I'd had so many difficult conversations during my unemployment period, but which now felt associated with friendship and forward momentum rather than crisis and uncertainty. So, what's your news? I asked as we settled into our familiar booth. I got the startup offer, Rachel said with a grin. Senior Director of Analytics for a company developing supply chain transparency tools for sustainable manufacturing. The role is perfect. The mission aligns with my values, and the compensation is significantly better than my current position. Rachel, that's incredible. Are you going to accept? I already did. I start in 3 weeks. She paused, looking slightly nervous. But there's something else. They're looking for a strategic development consultant to help with their go-to-market planning. I recommended you. The recommendation was flattering, but it also raised questions about my availability and priorities. Verdant was entering a critical growth phase that would require my full attention and energy. Taking on additional consulting work, even for a friend, could compromise my ability to deliver results for my primary employer. I'm honored that you thought of me, but I need to be thoughtful about outside commitments right now. Verdant's expansion timeline is aggressive, and I want to make sure I'm providing the focus and attention that Carmen and the investors deserve. Rachel nodded approvingly. I expected you'd say that, and honestly, it's part of why I recommended. You understand the importance of commitment and follow-through. Our conversation continued for 2 hours, covering everything from career development to relationship challenges to family dynamics. Near the end, Rachel asked a question that had been on my mind recently. Have you heard from Isadora lately? I hadn't spoken to my sister since that coffee shop conversation 9 months ago. Occasionally, I'd see updates on her LinkedIn profile. She was apparently thriving in her role at Sterling and Associates and had been promoted again to vice president of client strategy. Her success seemed genuine and substantial, built on the foundation of our shared Morrison disaster, but sustained by her own capabilities and ambition. Not directly, I said, though I know she's doing well professionally. Part of me wonders if I should reach out, but I'm not sure what that conversation would accomplish. Do you miss her? It was a complicated question. I miss the sister I thought Isadora was, someone who would prioritize family relationships over professional advancement, who would take responsibility for her mistakes rather than allowing others to bear the consequences. But I wasn't sure. I missed the actual person who had emerged during our crisis. I miss the relationship I thought we had, I said finally. But I don't miss the dynamic where my loyalty was expected but not reciprocated. That's healthy, I think. You can love someone while also recognizing that the relationship wasn't good for you. That night, I sat in my apartment reviewing the feasibility analysis I'd begun for West Coast expansion. The work was absorbing and challenging, requiring integration of market research, competitive analysis, operational planning, and financial modeling. But more than the intellectual challenge, what I appreciated was the clarity of purpose and the alignment between my efforts and outcomes as I worked. I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this point. 18 months ago, I'd been an ambitious but naive junior strategist who believed that hard work and loyalty would be sufficient protection against professional betrayal. The Morrison crisis had shattered those assumptions, forcing me to confront uncomfortable truths about family dynamics, workplace politics, and my own complicity in situations that didn't serve my interests. But the real transformation hadn't been professional, it had been personal. Learning to prioritize my own integrity over others' comfort, to demand reciprocity in relationships rather than providing unlimited support, to build something new rather than trying to repair something. That had been fundamentally broken. My phone rang with a call from an unknown Chicago number. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Nina, it's Isadora. Hearing her voice after 9 months of silence was jarring, though not as emotionally charged as I might have expected. She sounded older somehow, more thoughtful and less effervescent. Then the sister I remembered. Hi, Isadora. How are you? I'm doing well professionally. But Nina, I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation, and I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. I was quiet, unsure how to respond to an opening I hadn't expected. I know this is probably too little too late, but I need you to know that I understand what happened with Morrison and Sterling and Associates. I made choices that protected my career at your expense, and I tried to convince both of us that it was somehow beneficial for you. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. Her acknowledgement felt significant, though I found myself analyzing her words carefully rather than simply accepting them emotionally. I appreciate you saying that, I said. Though I'm curious what prompted this call now. Honestly, I've been seeing a therapist to work through some family and relationship patterns, and she's helped me understand how my behavior affected you. I also heard through professional networks that you're doing incredibly well with Verdant Social, and I realized that your success happened despite my actions, not because of them. We talked for 30 minutes, covering the Morrison situation, our family dynamics, and the career paths we'd both taken since our last conversation. Isadora was genuinely interested in my work with Verdant and seemed proud of my achievements in ways that felt authentic rather than performative. Nina, I know I probably don't have the right to ask this, but would you be open to having coffee sometime? Not because I want something from you, but because I miss having you in my life, and I'd like to see if we can rebuild some kind of relationship. The request was reasonable and seemed genuinely motivated, but it also required me to consider whether I was ready for that kind of emotional complexity in my life. I need to think about it, I said honestly. I've worked hard to build something positive and stable, and I want to be careful about relationships that might undermine that progress. I understand completely. And Nina, regardless of whether you decide you want to reconnect, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built. You deserve better from me, and I'm glad you found people who recognize your worth. After we hung up, I sat with the conversation for a long time, processing my feelings about Isadora's apology and her request to reconnect. The anger I carried for months had largely dissolved, replaced by something closer to sadness about lost potential and appreciation for the growth that had emerged from crisis. But I also recognized that forgiveness didn't necessarily require reconciliation. I could acknowledge Isadora's apology and personal growth while also protecting the peace and stability I'd worked to build. Some relationships were worth repairing, and others were better honored through grateful distance. The next morning, I texted her back. Thank you for calling and for your honesty about what happened. I'm not ready to meet in person yet, but I'm glad you're doing well and working on personal growth. Maybe we can revisit the idea in a few months. Her response was immediate and gracious. Of course, I'm proud of you, Nina. Take care of yourself. Later. That week, I completed the feasibility analysis for Verdant's West Coast expansion and presented my findings to Carmen and Marcus. The research indicated substantial opportunity, but also significant operational challenges that would require careful planning and execution. My recommendation was to proceed with a pilot program in Los Angeles, using that market as a testing ground for strategies that could later be applied to San Francisco and other West Coast cities. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need, Carmen said after reviewing my presentation. Ambitious enough to capture the opportunity, careful enough to minimize risk. I've also been thinking about our long-term strategic planning, I said. As we continue growing, we might want to consider bringing in additional strategic development support. Not because I can't handle the workload, but because having multiple perspectives on complex decisions tends to improve outcomes. It was a conversation that would have been impossible for me 18 months ago, recommending that my employer hire additional strategic support because I understood the value of collaboration rather than fearing that sharing responsibilities would diminish my importance. Actually, Marcus said, we've been discussing exactly that. Nina, how would you feel about taking on a strategic development manager role and building a small team focused on expansion planning and market analysis? The promotion would mean additional compensation, equity participation, and management responsibilities. But more importantly, it would mean building the kind of strategic planning team I'd always wanted to be part of, one based on collaboration, mutual respect, and shared commitment to ethical business practices. I'd be very interested in discussing that. I said that evening, I opened my personal journal and wrote the first entry I'd made in several months. Today marks exactly 8 months since the Morrison crisis that ended my career at Sterling and Associates. In some ways, it feels like a lifetime ago. I've learned so much about business, relationships, and myself since then. In other ways, it feels like yesterday. I can still remember the shock of being fired and the devastating realization that my sister had sacrificed my career to protect her own. But what strikes me most is how grateful I am now for that crisis. Not because it was pleasant or easy, but because it forced me to confront truths about myself and my relationships that I might never have addressed otherwise. I learned that loyalty without boundaries is enabling. I learned that family love doesn't require professional sacrifice. I learned that building something new is often better than repairing something that was broken from the beginning. Most importantly, I learned that my worth isn't determined by others' recognition or approval. I can contribute meaningfully to work I believe in, with people who share my values, in ways that honor both my capabilities and my integrity. Isadora called this week to apologize, and I'm still processing how I feel about potentially rebuilding our relationship. I've forgiven her, but I've also learned to protect myself from dynamics that don't serve my well-being. Maybe that's what healthy family relationships look like: love without sacrifice, support without enabling, connection without compromise. Tomorrow, I'll present my strategic recommendations for Verdant's next phase of growth. And next week, I'll start building the strategic development team that will help execute our expansion plans. I'm excited about the work, grateful for the opportunity, and confident in my ability to contribute meaningfully to something I believe in. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I belong. As I closed the journal and prepared for bed, I looked out my apartment window at the Chicago skyline, lights twinkling against the darkness of Lake Michigan. The city looked the same as it had 18 months ago, but everything else had changed: my work, my relationships, my understanding of myself and what I wanted from life. The girl who had prioritized others' comfort over her own integrity was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that authentic success required authentic relationships. The sister who had enabled rather than supported was learning what healthy boundaries looked like. The employee who had sought advancement through loyalty and sacrifice had become a leader who earned respect through competence and collaboration. Hadn't been an easy transformation, but it had been necessary. And now, finally, I was ready to build the future I actually wanted rather than the one others expected of me. Word count 2,547. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and we'll take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.